Every single day, someone wakes up, they brush their teeth, they make their coffee, they look in the mirror, they look completely, utterly normal. And by the end of that same day, they have taken another human life. 31 minutes. That is how often someone is murdered in the United States alone. Not in a war zone, not in a dystopian film. In the real world, the same world where you ordered food this week, laughed at something on your phone, and went about your life as if darkness like that could never reach you. But here is the question that scientists, psychologists, and criminal investigators have been obsessing over for decades. The question that most people are too uncomfortable to ask out loud. What actually happens inside a person's mind? Before they kill. Not after. Not during. Before. What is the internal world of a human being who is about to cross the one line that every society, every religion, and every moral code in human history has agreed should never be crossed? That is what we are here to uncover today. Welcome to Dark Minds Uncovered. Because today we are not just going to tell you a story. We are going to go deep into the science, the psychology, and the cold hard truth behind why human beings kill each other. We are going to walk through 3 real cases. 3 completely different people, 3 completely different minds, 3 completely different reasons. And then we are going to break down the 4 core psychological triggers that researchers have identified as the driving force behind almost every act of killing ever studied. This is not true crime for entertainment. This is true crime for understanding. And by the time this video is over, you will never look at the people around you the same way again. Let's begin. The year is 1986. Florida, United States. Manuel Pardo Jr. was not born a monster. That is the first thing you need to understand. He was born in Cuba, raised in the suburbs of Florida, and by early accounts he was bright, ambitious, and hungry for a sense of purpose. He joined the military. He had a plan. But life did not cooperate with that plan. He was discharged. His career collapsed. Relationships fell apart. And with every failure, every rejection, every moment where the world looked the other way, something inside Manuel Pardo began to change. Not all at once. Slowly, like a pressure gauge that nobody was watching. He began to develop a worldview, a dark, twisting belief that human beings were fundamentally worthless. That society was rotten, that the world was overrun with what he called parasites. And he, Manuel Pardo, had been chosen to clean it up. In January of 1986, over the course of 9 days, Pardo and 2 accomplices murdered 9 people across the state of Florida. Not strangers who had wronged him, not enemies who had threatened him. 9 ordinary people in the wrong place, at the wrong time, caught in the crosshairs of one man's catastrophically broken mind. When investigators asked him why, he answered without flinching, without remorse, without a single tremor in his voice. He believed what he had done was necessary. 9 families destroyed, 9 futures erased, and the man responsible felt nothing except a quiet, terrifying certainty that he had been right. We will come back to what was happening inside Manuel Pardo's mind in just a moment. Now let me introduce you to someone very different. His name is Gary Ridgway, and unlike Manuel Pardo, Gary Ridgway did not kill from rage. He did not kill from a burning sense of injustice. He did not kill because the world had failed him or because he believed in some twisted mission. Gary Ridgway killed because it was simply something he did. Between 1982 and the year 2000, nearly 2 full decades, Gary Ridgway murdered at least 49 women in and around Washington state. He worked a steady job. He attended church. He had neighbors who waved to him in the driveway, colleagues who ate lunch beside him, and a family who had no idea what he was. He became known as the Green River Killer, one of the most prolific serial killers in the history of the United States. When investigators finally caught him, after years of one of the longest manhunts in American law enforcement history, they sat down with him. They wanted to understand. They asked him directly and plainly why. He shrugged. He said he killed to do his thing.
No breakdown.
No trauma response.
No tears, no anger, no dramatique confession.
He spoke about his victims the way most people speak about running errands. Casually, patiently, as if ending a human life was simply an item on a to-do list that had already been crossed off and forgotten. 49 women, and he felt nothing about any of them. The answer to why Gary Ridgway was the way he was does not lie in his childhood, his failures, or his beliefs. It lies entirely inside his brain, and we will get there. And then there is the third type of killer. I want you to pay close attention here because this one, I believe, is the most dangerous of them all. Not because of how many people one person kills, but because of how many people one person can convince to kill or to die. His name was James Warren Jones. You may know him as Jim Jones. Jim Jones was a preacher, a community organizer, a man who, by all public accounts, was passionate, charismatic, and deeply committed to equality and justice. He built a church called the People's Temple that attracted thousands of followers, black and white, rich and poor, educated and not. People who were searching for meaning, for belonging, for something bigger than themselves. And Jim Jones gave them exactly that. He gave them a world, a language, an identity, family, and then, quietly and patiently over years, he took everything else away. By November 1978, Jim Jones had relocated his followers to a remote compound in the jungles of Guyana, South America, a place they called Jonestown, cut off from their families, their previous lives, their outside relationships, totally dependent on one man's voice, one man's word, one man's vision of reality. On November 18, 1978, Jim Jones gathered his congregation and told them the time had come. 918 men, women, and children died that day. Most of them drank cyanide-laced punch. Children were given it by their own parents, parents who had been convinced, completely, spiritually, unshakably convinced, that this was not death. This was transcendence. Jim Jones did not see himself as a murderer. In his own mind, he was a savior leading his people home. 918 human beings, gone. Because one man understood something terrifying about the human mind and used it without mercy. That is the power of ideological killing. And it is the reason why this third type of killer is, in many ways, the most chilling thing that psychology has ever had to explain. Now, let us talk about what science actually says. Because these three cases are not just dramatic stories. They are windows into something real, something measurable, something that researchers have been studying for decades. And what they have found is this. Nearly every act of human killing can be traced back to one of four core psychological triggers. For doors. And every killer, somewhere along the line, walked through at least one of them. The first trigger is the one most people assume is the only trigger. Rage. But here is what science tells us that most people fundamentally misunderstand about rage-driven violence. It is almost never just about the moment. The moment is just the detonation. The bomb was built long before anyone struck the match. The American Psychological Association's research into violence consistently points to what psychologists call cumulative effect dysregulation, which, stripped of the clinical language, simply means this: a person has been swallowing emotional pain for a very long time. Rejection, humiliation, powerlessness, shame, failure after failure that was never properly processed, never spoken aloud, never released. Stacks, quietly, invisibly, like pressure building inside a sealed container. And here is the brutal neurological reality of what happens when that pressure becomes too great. The prefrontal cortex, the rational, decision-making, consequence-calculating part of the brain, goes effectively offline. It is overwhelmed. And what takes over is the amygdala, the ancient, primal, purely emotional brain, which has exactly one mode when it is pushed beyond its limits. React, destroy, survive. Manuel Pardo did not become a murderer on the day of his first killing. He became one slowly, across years of accumulated shame and festering resentment that he never learned to process in any other way. By the time he acted, in his mind, he was not committing murder. He was releasing something that had been building for years. The most important thing to understand about rage killers is this: they almost always show warning signs long before they ever act. Warning signs that the people around them either missed, dismissed, or did not know how to interpret. We will come back to exactly what those signs look like in a few minutes. The second trigger is the one that I find scientifically the most disturbing, because it removes every explanation we are comfortable with. Psychopathy. Here is what you need to understand about psychopathy immediately. It is not madness. It is not confusion. It is not a person who does not know what they are doing. A psychopath knows exactly what they are doing. They understand that society calls it wrong. They are aware of consequences, of laws, of the grief they cause. They simply do not care. And the reason they do not care is not a moral failure. It is a neurological one. Brain imaging studies comparing psychopathic individuals to non-psychopathic individuals have shown, repeatedly and consistently, dramatically reduced activity in two critical brain regions, the amygdala and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. These are the regions responsible for empathy, for guilt, for the emotional weight we feel when we witness another person suffering. In simple terms, when you see someone in pain, your brain responds, pulls at you, creates discomfort. It generates the emotional friction that stops most people from crossing certain lines. When Gary Ridgway looked at his victims, that friction simply did not exist. Not suppressed, not overcome, simply absent. He was not fighting an urge toward compassion and losing. The urge was never there to begin with. And that is what makes psychopathy so uniquely dangerous and so uniquely difficult to detect. Because psychopaths are not what Hollywood tells you they are. They are not raving, wild-eyed, obviously disturbed. The research tells us something far more unsettling. Psychopaths are often extraordinarily charming, patient, strategic. They learn very early how to read people, not because they feel what others feel, but because they study it. They mimic it. They wear empathy like a costume. And here is the number that should give you pause. Researchers estimate that somewhere between 1 and 4% of the general population has significant psychopathic traits. The vast majority will never commit a violent crime. They exist in boardrooms, in politics, in everyday life. But understanding what psychopathy actually is means understanding this. The most dangerous predators in the world almost never look dangerous at all. The third trigger is the one that lives not in broken minds or criminal histories, but inside every single human being alive. The survival instinct. Every human brain is hardwired with what neuroscientists call the fight-or-flight response. It is ancient. It is pre-rational. It evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in a world where physical threats were constant and hesitation was death. It is, in the most literal sense, the reason our species is still here. But that same ancient wiring carries a built-in danger in the modern world. Under conditions of extreme perceived threat, not necessarily real threat, but perceived threat, the prefrontal cortex can go dark. The rational mind, the part of you that thinks in consequences and ethics and long-term outcomes, effectively gets shut out of the conversation. And the amygdala takes over completely. Fight, survive, eliminate the threat. This is how ordinary people with no criminal history, no violent tendencies, no darkness that anyone around them ever noticed, can find themselves committing acts of lethal violence in moments of extreme desperation. Domestic confrontations that spiral past a point of no return. Armed altercations where the body reacts before the mind can intervene. Moments of absolute perceived hopelessness where the brain decides, in a fraction of a second, that this is the only way out. The survival trigger does not require a broken mind. It does not require years of festering rage or an absent conscience. It requires only one thing, a human brain pushed past the point where reason can hold on. And now we arrive at the fourth trigger, the one that keeps criminal psychologists awake at night. Not because of what one person can do, but because of what one person can make thousands of others do. Ideological killing, because rage can be identified. Psychopathy can be studied. Survival instincts can be de-escalated. But a person who kills or who leads others to kill or die, from a place of absolute moral certainty, that is an entirely different category of danger. The psychologist Albert Bandura dedicated much of his career to understanding how ordinary human beings disengage from their own moral compass well enough to commit or participate in acts of violence they would otherwise find unthinkable. He called it moral disengagement, and he identified several mechanisms through which it operates. The first is dehumanization, the systematic reduction of the target, a person, a group, a community, from a full human being with feelings, families, and futures to something lesser, something that does not quite deserve the same moral consideration. History has shown us, with devastating and repeating consistency, how that language can be weaponized. The second mechanism is moral justification, the reframing of violence not as wrong, but as righteous, as necessary, as a sacred duty to something greater than the self. Jim Jones did not tell his followers they were going to die. He told them they were going to be free. He told them they were making a statement against an oppressive world. He had spent years constructing an entire reality inside their minds, a reality in which his word was truth, in which the outside world was the enemy, and in which dying on his instruction was the most meaningful thing a person could do. 918 people believed him, and that is not a story about stupidity. It is not a story about weakness. Those 918 people included doctors, lawyers, teachers, parents, people who had built entire lives before Jim Jones entered them. It is a story about the extraordinary power of a carefully constructed belief system to override the most fundamental human instincts, including the instinct to survive. Given the right environment, the right leader, the right sustained pressure over the right amount of time, the research suggests that the human mind is far more vulnerable to ideological capture than any of us would like to believe. I want to speak to you directly now, because everything we have covered today is not just psychology for the sake of fascination. It is knowledge with real-world stakes. I want to give you something concrete, something you can actually carry with you. Here are 4 warning signs that research consistently identifies as flags that someone may be moving toward a dangerous breaking point. These are not guarantees. They are not a checklist for diagnosing the people around you, but they are signals that deserve to be taken seriously rather than explained away. The first warning sign is escalating isolation. When someone begins systematically withdrawing from the people who care about them, cutting off friendships, avoiding family, disappearing from the social world they once inhabited, that isolation is both a symptom of something wrong and an accelerant that makes it worse. It removes the natural friction, the human connection, the reality checks that might otherwise pull someone back from the edge. Pay attention when someone you care about starts quietly disappearing. The second warning sign is expressed hopelessness. Statements like "nothing matters anymore," "there is no point," or "the world would be better off without certain people," these are never just venting. They are not dramatic overreactions to be laughed off or minimized. Research into pre-violence psychology consistently shows that verbalized hopelessness is one of the most reliable early signals that a person's internal world is deteriorating in a serious way. Take it seriously, always. The third warning sign is an obsessive, escalating grievance. Rage killers almost universally fixate on a specific source of blame before they act. Person, an institution, a group, a system. When someone in your life becomes increasingly, obsessively consumed by a single target of hatred, when every conversation circles back to the same enemy, when the anger is not just present but growing, that pattern is worth noticing. The fourth warning sign is the one that people miss most often, and it may be the most important of all. A sudden, unexplained calm after a long period of visible distress. This seems counterintuitive. Surely calm is a good sign? But in pre-violence psychology, this pattern appears repeatedly. In the moments before someone acts, a quiet can fall over them. The internal war is over. The decision has been made. And from the outside, it can look devastatingly like things are finally getting better. If someone has been visibly struggling for weeks or months and suddenly seems at peace with no clear reason, do not assume the storm has passed. Check in. Ask the question. Be present. And if any of what I have described tonight brings a specific person to mind, someone in your life who is showing these signs, please do not look away. Conversation, a phone call, showing up when it would be easier not to, costs nothing, and it could mean everything. We started this video with a question. What actually happens inside the mind of a person before they kill? And now you know it is not one answer. It is never one answer. Sometimes it is years of silent, swallowed pain that finally boils over into catastrophic rage. Sometimes it is a brain that was simply wired without the circuitry for empathy, walking through life without the emotional guardrails the rest of us take for granted. Sometimes it is the most primal part of the human nervous system seizing control in a moment of desperation, overriding everything rational in a fraction of a second. And sometimes, most terrifyingly of all, It is a human being who has been carefully, deliberately, systematically convinced that what they are doing is not just acceptable, but righteous. The human mind is the most complex, the most powerful, and, under the right conditions, the most dangerous thing that has ever existed on this planet. And we have only just started to uncover it. If today's video made you think differently, if it challenged something you thought you understood, then this channel was built for you. Every week on Dark Minds Uncovered, we go deeper. We ask harder questions. We look at the cases, the science, and the psychology that most people do not want to sit with long enough to truly understand. Hit subscribe so you do not miss a single one. And I want to hear from you in the comments. What was the single most surprising thing you learned today? Was it the neuroscience of psychopathy? The survival instinct trigger? The story of Jonestown? Tell me. I read every comment on this channel. Because next week, we are going somewhere even darker. He was handsome, educated, charming in a way that made people feel lucky to know him. He volunteered at a suicide prevention hotline. He studied law. He was, by every external measure, someone you would want in your life. He was also one of the most calculated, cold-blooded predators that American history has ever recorded. You already know his name, Ted Bundy. Next week, we go inside his mind. I will see you there.